Hello, Sons of Norway members. Today I have the pleasure of talking with author Liese Greensfelder about her 2025 book, Accidental Shepherd: How a California Girl Rescued an Ancient Mountain Farm in Norway. Many of our members will be reading and discussing the book as part of the Sons of Norway book club, so I'll only provide a general summary here. Accidental Shepherd is a candid account of Liese Greensfelder's year in the remote farmhouse in Norway in 1972. Confronted with dangers and obstacles for which she was utterly unprepared, Liese tells a story of remarkable resilience and records the fascinating but rapidly vanishing traditions of the community that took her in. Welcome, Liese.
Thank you, Jenna. It's great to be here.
It was such a pleasure to read your book, Accidental Shepherd, and your descriptions really transport the reader into the pungent smells of the barn, and the intensity of your experiences become palpable through your farmyard tales. What was the writing process like for the book, and how did you find the time to record so much detail in 1972, given the long and tired hours of a mostly solo farmer?
Well, I didn't record all those details, but many of those details have been seared into my brain ever since I had that experience. It was an extraordinary year. Everything was new, everything was different. I'd never worked on a farm before. I knew nothing about sheep. I knew a little bit about horses. And uh, things happened that I just couldn't forget. Having said that, I also started writing this book a year after I left the farm. And so I had a lot of notes from that first initial writing that I did, which then became published into a book that it became published in 1975 in Norway. And it was written in the form of letters home to my family. And I also had all those letters. And that was the one and only way I could communicate with my family all through the year, was to write them letters. My mother would have disowned me if I hadn't sent her a letter each week. And I spared no details in those letters. There are a lot of hair-raising, death-threatening experiences. And I feel sorry for my mom that I didn't spare her kind of the really personal things I wrote only to my sisters. So the letters were highly detailed, and I have those as a written memory of that year.
You later went back to the village of Øystese to research and then fill in some of the accounts in your book. How was that homecoming, and what did you think when you checked in on the old farm?
Well, let's see, I left the farm, or left Norway. That was the last time I saw the farm for a while, at the end of 1974. And then I went back in 1977 with my husband-to-be, man who I'd met as soon as I got back to the United States 2 years earlier, in 1975. And we spent the entire summer living in a house close to the farm that was just given to us to live in by a friend, Norwegian friend. And going back to the farm then that first time was difficult because the farmer was living there then. And if people read the book, they'll know I didn't have the best relationship with the farmer, nor did any of his neighbors, but one. But I've been back many times since then. And in 1986, when the farmer passed away and his nephew inherited the farm, I've been back to the farm many times since then. And it's always a moving experience for me to go there, to see the changes. Svein Hovland, the nephew, has really preserved the outer appearances and much of the inner appearances of the buildings. He's done a magnificent job. The extraordinary garden that I write about in the book, that was Johannes Hovland's garden, full of botanical wonders. Svein and his partner Marianne have taken care of that. And for many years, Svein did actually run it as a farm with sheep. And so going back and just finding sheep on the farm and being welcomed by the new farmer there was just more than moving. It was wonderful to be able to do that.
Back in the 70s, you were interviewed 2 times for Norwegian TV and had a chance to tell your captivating story. What was it like to recount those experiences in front of a TV audience and also most of Norway's population?
It was extraordinary. The first time, I had been on the farm for about 6 months when somebody in the town of Øystese wrote to a man I'd never heard of, but apparently was like the second most famous person in Norway after King Olaf, who was still alive then. That man's name was Erik Bye, and he created a series of 6 special programs each year, and those were the most popular programs in Norway. Norway had only one television station at the time. It broadcast about 9, 10, sometimes 11 hours a day, and that's all. And there was no other television available. And I was told that about 95% of the population of Norway watched these 6 special shows. So I was highly, highly nervous going into this. I mean, probably dying with anxiety. But the moment I walked into the studios of NRK, Norwegian's broadcasting studio, people walked out of their offices to greet me and shake my hand and tell me they couldn't believe that here was a California girl working on this remote farm, and they were congratulating me and just, saying they were so happy to see me. And then when I finally got to the interview portion, which lasted quite a while, Erik Bye is a charming interviewer, just absolutely charming. He's 6'5" tall, and he hovers over you, but he sits down right next to you on a bench, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at me and asking me the funniest questions and some serious questions. And I was just, it was a wonderful experience, because by then I really could speak my dialect that I'd learned during these 6 months on the farm. I was speaking it quite well. And I actually kind of knew when I would say something that the audience would think was, whoa, this is really dialectical. And I was kind of reveling in being able to do that and having all these easy questions shot my way by Erik Bye. And it was delightful. I would say the consequences of that were a bit difficult, because everybody in Norway saw that, and all of a sudden I became this celebrity, and then I couldn't go any place without people staring at me. And Norwegians have this, I believe, still have this strange way of not actually smiling and waving when you see them, unless you're on a mountain trail, and then everybody smiles and waves and says hello, or they just kind of look at you and you walk past them. And I would go down to the town and I feel like that. So that was the first time. The second time was nearly 3 years later in 73, 74, 75, 76, 4 years later, in 1975. So it was just a few years later. And that was the sesquicentennial of the launch of the sloop Restoration on July 4th, headed toward America. And of course, right now, it's the bicentennial. So the sesquicentennial was 150 years, and Erik Bye came to the United States and made 6 special programs in the most Norwegian American places in the country. And he invited me to be on his show in Seattle. And so he paid for me to fly up there and spend a night or two. And that also was a lot of fun. I wasn't quite as nervous. And that one is available on NRK's website. And I can't really quite believe that he was as tall as he was, but he was not sitting on a bench that time, Jana. He was hovering over me, and like probably that much higher than me. And I'm just looking up at him the whole time. And he's asking questions, and I'm still having fun speaking my dialect, although it wasn't quite as good then. And there were not really there was really no fallout that I experienced from that show, other than it's really fun to have it available online right now. The other thing I love is that my next door neighbor, Torkel, who appears in the book over and over and over again, he went to Namsos, farther north, to his daughter's graduation from nursing school. When he came back, he said that he had been talking to somebody up there on the street, and the person had said, "Hey, you sound just like that girl on Eric B's show." And so he was speaking the dialect that I was speaking, and that was like the most amazing compliment I could ever have gotten. And the person had no idea that Torkel was actually my next door neighbor. And he probably I was speaking exactly the way he spoke because I talked to him almost more than anybody else.
That's when you know you've made it, is when someone says that a Norwegian sounds like you in their
Yeah.
dialect. Were there any interesting anecdotes from when somebody recognized you as the girl from the farm in Hardanger?
The only thing I can really think of is a couple years later when I was leaving Norway. So that's December 70, January 73 to December 74. I think that was the flight where I was just mysteriously moved to first class on SAS, and I figured that they had recognized me.
And jumping forward to today and the release of Accidental Shepherd, what kind of feedback have you gotten on your book so far?
It's been overwhelming. I remember, it came out on February 4th, and a few reviews were posted online, people who had had advanced readers' copies. And one of the first three or four, and many of them have said things like, "I didn't want this book to end. I started reading it slowly because I just wanted to keep it going." And I remember just, crying over some of these reviews because I've worked so long on this book and not having any idea of how it would be received. And I was just on tour for 3 weeks through Minnesota and Iowa and Nebraska, a little bit in Colorado. And at the bookstores where I had evening events, there were full houses, which for most of those bookstores means like 35 seats. Prairie Lights bookstore in Iowa had larger seating capacity. It was not quite full, but the sales have been great, and people have been congratulating me on the book, and I'm just overwhelmed by it. It's been wonderful.
That's great to hear.
Thank you.
Uh, have you received any unique responses to the book from people working in agriculture?
A few. There's not a whole lot of farmers in the United States, but in Iowa, I did do a reading at a radio station in Ames. Of course, that's Iowa State University, one of the great agricultural universities. And there were several farmers there who were elderly who really told me they remembered it resonated with them, a lot of the things that I was doing. I was working in the year I was in Norway on the farm. I didn't realize it, but most of Norway had already modernized. Whereas on my farm, Johannes's farm that I ran for him, everything was run by horse. There was nothing mechanical on the farm except for a large a cutting machine that was a lot like a rototiller. You held handles and pushed it. It self-propelled itself, and it had a 4-foot cutting bar. And that was the one mechanical thing that was run by gas on the farm. I had horsepower. I had an ancient barn, ancient tools. Everything was pretty well done the way it had been done for probably the past century on that farm. So there have not been too many farmers that understood, that remember that, who have spoken with me about my book. But those who did were, really happy to read the book.
Wonderful to hear. And what was your favorite part about having lived in Norway?
It's hard to say what my favorite part is. in my initial 6 months on the farm, everything was my favorite part. The people were so generous and they just poured out their hearts to me. I got to know, a dozen neighbors, and we became very close friends. And the help I had from them was what carried me through the year. And so, of course, those friendships were my favorite part. But then I was in the most beautiful place I'd ever been in. And I was a backpacker. I hiked in the Sierra Nevada mountains, which I consider the second most beautiful place I've ever been in. But the landscape and the mountains right behind the farm, the farm I was on was at the very end of a 3-mile dirt road. It was at 800 feet above the fjord. And I had a view from the kitchen window that just looked out over forests. Couldn't see the fjord because it kind of flattened out before it dropped down into town. But I could see a glacier on the other side of the fjord on top of the snow-covered mountains. And I could hike right from the farm up into the mountains. And that was just magnificent, beautiful hiking territory. So I would say it was just the scenery, the mountains, the place where I was, and the neighbors.
And as you had mentioned before, you really got steeped in the dialect of the Hardanger area. Were there any favorite words or phrases that you can think of that you learned that year?
Well, one of them is a shed, the loft of a shed, which I don't even know what it is. What would it be called in real Norwegian? But it's a skytjeskucho. And that just is a great word. The little loft of the shed where you store things. The pronunciation of the little Norwegian letter A with a circle over it, which is pronounced like O, in almost like an O sound in the rest of Norway, in a lot of Norway, is pronounced ow in my dialect. So the word påske, which means Easter, in my dialect, which is called kvamamaul instead of kvamamol, kvamamaul, my dialect, you say pausche. So if I tried to talk to anybody in Eastern Norway, they'd have no idea what I was talking about when I said pausche. And I did know Danish going into it because I'd been an exchange student there for 13 months. And so I really could understand the people in Oslo better than in the Hardanger Fjord where I was. So I knew when I was speaking dialect, definitely. Another word that I really loved was the word for a cow, which is I kyr. And the reason I love that is because kyr is also the word for cow in Icelandic. And people who settled Iceland, a lot of them came from Western Norway, and there's a number of words in the dialect that I spoke that are the Icelandic words. And the reason I love the word kyr is because it's Icelandic, but also it's the plural for cow. So every place else in the country, they say, in ku, one cow, flere kyr, or kur, depending on where you are. But in my dialect, the plural and the singular were the same. So I would be talking to people and I'd talk about kyr to me, my cow, and they would go, no, that's wrong. You're not saying that's plural, sorry. And I would have to correct them and just say, nope, det dialekten min, det det som sånn som snakker jeg. Og du kan ikke si at det forkert. So, I don't know. Let's see, I knew you were going to ask that question. You prepared me, so I wrote down another word, but oh, I know. The word for yesterday, which is Igor, and we say Iar. So if anybody spoke with me and I said Iar, they had no idea what I was saying unless they came from Western Norway.
So neat to hear what the differences are, and then also how you had kind of an inroad via Danish.
Yeah,
as
I
you were-
could not have stayed on that farm if I hadn't known Danish. I as an aside, if I may, when I arrived, it very quickly understood in the very first 24 hours that if I spoke Danish and just pronounced each letter in a Danish word, many of your listeners might know that Danes drop half of their consonants and half of their vowels. So if I just spoke Danish but pronounced all the letters, everybody could understand me quite well. But I had an extremely difficult time understanding other people for months.
Wow. And since then, have you visited other parts of Norway?
Yeah. While I was living on the farm, I did become famous. There was no place I could go that people didn't recognize me. But well, anyway, I lived for a year in Norfjord, and I worked for several months on Hurtigruten, the coastal freighter, which in November and December it was almost only a freighter. There were very few tourists, or actually there were no tourists. There were a few Norwegians going up and down the coast, but I worked on that, so I saw the entire coast. I think I did 3 or 4 trips from Bergen up to Kirkenes. It was mostly dark, but I saw the northern lights just night after night. It was extraordinary. I have a good friend who lives in Sognefjord and one who lives in Upper Gudbrandsdal, and I've spent time with them in both those places. So and I actually spent a week in Lofoten with those 2 friends that I just mentioned back in 2015. Oh, that was wonderful.
Lastly, can you share some information on an exciting new development for your story as the accidental shepherd?
I would love to, and thank you for asking. About 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago now, I received an email from a Norwegian movie producer named Christer Fossmer, and he is at. We talked about it, and now he has an option on the book, which means he has exclusive rights to the book for 6 months while he investigates. That's automatically renewable while he investigates the feasibility of making a movie. So that involves him finding funding for it, and he's already applied to a grant and is applying this week to 2 other grants. And of course, he's looking for private funds plus his own funds. And during that time, he'll also look for a screenwriter. It's going to be a dramatization, not a documentary. And he will be looking to cast an American young woman to play me. And so that's what a movie option is. So he has an option on the book, and he is very excited because he's done a lot of work in Hardanger, and he just feels like he's so excited about this that he's got me really excited. And nevertheless, only one movie out of I don't know, several ever goes from the option phase to actually becoming a movie. But he's got the energy to do it and the experience. So fingers crossed that the book will become a movie.
That is great to hear. And maybe you'll be involved with some of the writing or consulting on your accent.
Yeah. I don't know how to, I don't know how an American actor would be able to play my role. He has some ideas, but I haven't asked him about too many details. I was thinking it would have to be a Norwegian actor, and he's saying, no, we're going to have to film some of it in California, and it needs to be an American. And so if they can find a good actor who would like to do it, who's well known, that's one of the first steps in creating a movie, is to have the cast, especially the lead person in the cast. So if anybody out there has ideas for who might play a 20-year-old American girl working on a farm in Norway, who has got some kind of a, somewhat famous in the United States, send those suggestions in, please.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for meeting with me, and I wish you all the best of luck in your book tour and with your book's future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jen. This has been really fun.